your week 2 SAT reading lesson, and today we are going to be going over the infamous dual passage. Now, I've been teaching or talking about the SAT for around 3 years now. Not super long time, but I'm pretty familiar with the process. I've talked to a lot of people about it, and the one, at least I guess one of the most dreaded things that the people talk about is the dual passage. Why would they give us two passages to read? How do you compare them? These are common questions that I get asked a lot. And the dual passage can look pretty intimidating, especially because sometimes it talks about different arguments that you need to compare. Sometimes it's in historical language. But honestly, if you know the right strategies, which I'll teach you today, and you go through this in a very methodical way, you should be able to answer these questions pretty well. Okay, so today I'm going to go over the strategies for the dual passage. And honestly, they're pretty similar to the strategies that we learned last week. And the biggest thing we learned last week was mark and read. And that stays the exact same for this passage, except for just a few slight modifications. Okay, so as always, you should go through every single question and analyze what type of question it is. Okay, so it says here 32 based on passage 1, Ward and her co-authors. It's talking about the whole question, but it's also from passage 1, so still mark it as 1. This will be important as you're actually reading the essays. Okay, cool. According to Ward and her co-authors in passage 1, expanded educational opportunities will enable women to become more. Okay, also put, this is an actual E1 question. So put an E, and then put 1. And also, expanded educational opportunities, keep that in mind while reading the passage. Okay. In passage 1, the use of phrase National Reserve, line 43. This is the same as always. Just go back, find line 43, wherever that is, National Reserve, and then put the question number down, 35. Okay. Yeah, this part's okay. Okay, line 64, secure, same thing as always. Go back, 64, secure, and 36. Okay, now we shift from I guess the shift happens here, but we shifted from the first passage to the second passage. According to Dilk in passage 2, England has become increasingly industrialized, which development has also taken place. So put an E2 next to this because it's an entire passage 2, but it also gives you some keywords. So let's go back and see if we can find any of those. All right. Talks about industries, ever increasing complication. So the answer might be in this area. So just put it there and keep it in mind. And 38, Dilk most strongly implies that one consequence of continuing to deny political representation to women, that's also E2. And that's also something you should keep in mind. Look about something that says if rights will continue to be denied. Okay. All right, now here's where it gets a little tricky. The last 4 questions of a dual passage will almost, if not always, ask you to compare and contrast the two passages that you read. For example, let's look at 39. Based on passage 1, Ward and her co-authors would most likely object to a course of action advocated by Dilk in passage 2 on the grounds that it would. So it's clearly comparing the two passages. And this is also a dual question. Because it lists both of them. But if it's one of these dual questions that asks about both passages, it will also put a B next to it, like this. Just because it's both, B for both. And same here, talking about passage 1. And, yeah. So it does give you a line here, and this is your preference, but I choose not to mark the lines up in comparison ones because you're honestly going to have to go back and read the line over anyway. And this is also a both one. So for now, it seems like we're good. So we'll go back and read the passage. All right. Oh, also, just to keep in mind, this is just something that you should, I guess, know before starting. In any dual passage, these two will always have a relationship. Passage 1 will either explain something, and passage 2 will either disagree with it and agree with it and then expand on those opinions. It's either agree or disagree like 99% of the time. So just keep in mind that there's a chance they support each other, or I think this is more likely, honestly. The SAT does this more, they oppose each other. All right, same as any other passage that we've already done and we've already practiced. You read the title first. Passage 1 is adapted from Mary Ward, an appeal against female suffrage. This is why titles are important. Already from the title, we know that this passage will not support women's suffrage. The second one is passage 2, adapted from an appeal against female suffrage, a reply. So if it's a reply, it's replying to this thing, and we're not really sure what it's going to say, but if I had to guess, passage 2 probably supports women's suffrage. Originally published in 1889, women in the United Kingdom in 1899 did not have the right to vote in elections for Parliament, the national legislature. All right, let's get started. As voters for members of school boards, boards of guardians, and other important public bodies, women have now opportunities for public usefulness, which must promote the growth of character and at the same time strengthen among them the social sense and habit. All these changes of recent years, together with the great improvements in women education which have accompanied them, we cordially welcome. So here, the author's providing kind of a counter, kind of leading them in, because now they say, but we believe that the emancipating process has now reached the limits fixed by the physical constitution of women and by the fundamental difference which must always exist between their main occupations and those of men. So it's saying that women and men are fundamentally different. They care of the sick, the treatment of the poor, education of children, and all these matters and others besides. They have made good their claim to larger and more extended powers. We rejoice in it. But when it comes to questions of foreign or colonial policy or of grave constitutional change, then we maintain that the necessity and normal experience of women, speaking generally and in the mass, does not and can never provide them with such materials for sound judgment as are open to men. Okay. If we turn from the right of women to the suffrage, a right which on the grounds just given we deny, to the effect which the possession of other suffrage may be expected to have on their character and possession on family life, we find ourselves no less in doubt. It is urged that the influence of women in politics will tell upon the side of morality. We believe that it does so tell already, and will do so with greater forces as women, by improved education, fit themselves to exert it more widely and efficiently. But it may be asked, on what does this moral influence depend? We believe that it depends largely on the qualities which the natural positions and functions of women, as they are at best present, tend to develop, and which might seriously be impaired by their admission to the turmoil of active political life. These qualities are above all sympathy and disinterestedness. So this passage is saying that women have natural qualities that men don't possess, like sympathy and disinterestedness, that means that participating in politics will probably be bad for them. Now, when reading these articles, it's easy to get a little frustrated or, I guess, a little shocked by how different the times were. My advice is just to focus on the main idea of the passage. Don't put your own opinions in it, especially when you're answering the question, because that could lead to you getting a wrong answer by being biased. Okay. Any disposition of things which threatens to lessen the national reserve of such forces as these we held to be a misfortune. All right, so now we can finally answer our first question, which is 35. So let's go to that. Which choice provides, reading wrong question. In passage 1, the use of the phrase national reserve mainly serves to lament the government's inability to resolve disputes with civility. I really don't think it's meant to be that negative. It's just saying threatens to lessen the national reserve. That's not a bad thing. In fact, I'd argue that national reserve is probably a good thing in the context of this passage. So no. Emphasize the country's resilience in the face of adversity. Okay, the reason this question is wrong is because of the word adversity. What adversity is it talking about in this area? It's just talking about the national reserve of such forces. It isn't explaining the problems that it faces, so that's not correct. Third, characterize certain traits as essential to the country's overall well-being. So far, this seems like a great answer to me, because that's exactly what this part does. it's talking about the national reserve of such forces. So it's saying that we need to maintain these forces to succeed, like sympathy and disinterestedness. So far seems like a great answer. And D, provide an example of a topic that is hotly debated in Parliament. It's not really trying to provide an example, so the answer is clearly C. Okay, so now at this point, we finished reading passage 1, and here's where the strategies start to differ a little from normal passages with just one. When you're doing a dual passage, what I recommend you do is, after reading passage 1, answer all the questions related to passage 1, and then take a look at the questions that compare the two passages to see if you can eliminate any answers. That might sound a little complicated, but it's genuinely not that hard. Let me show you how to do it. Okay, so let's answer all the passage 1 questions. And you answer them the exact same way as usual. Based on passage 1, Ward and her co-authors would likely concede that there is a small proportion of women in England who may be, so we want a concession here, so let's look at the lines given. Okay. All these changes of recent years, although with the great improvement in women's education, we have accompanied them, we cordially welcome. Okay, so it's talking about welcoming women's accompaniment and women's rights in some areas, but it's also not really talking about the women themselves and what they possess, because that's what question 32 is asking, so probably not. But let's look at the next one, 9 to 14. But we believe that the emancipating process has now reached the limits fixed by the physical constitution of women and by the fundamental difference which must always exist between their main occupations and those of men. This seems so far like a great answer because it's talking about how women have reached their limit and are getting to the point where we are jeopardizing their natural constructs, but also that in some ways it's, I guess, some women like have the qualities that they need. Yeah, so it seems like that's the right answer. Let's get 33C. Okay, if we turn from the right of women to the suffrage and right to the grounds, that one just doesn't seem like the right answer because it's not really like talking about like a concession, so definitely not that. And 40 to 41. These qualities are above all sympathy and just no concession whatsoever. So B seems like the correct answer here. And we'll use B to answer question A. Let's read it one more time just to keep in mind what we're looking at. But we believe that the emancipating process has now reached the limits fixed by the physical constitution of women and by the fundamental difference which must always exist between the main occupation and those of men. All right. So now let's get the answer choices. Ward and her authors will most likely concede that there's a small proportion of women in England who may be qualified to assess complex political matters affecting the nation at large. Yes, that seems like a great answer so far because it's saying that some women might be qualified. Okay, reluctant to volunteer or to serve. Definitely not true. Conscious of the negative consequences that suffrage may have on their own lives, That one makes that part wrong. Eager to take advantage of new opportunities to become educated. Well, that's not really what B talks about. So the answer has to be A here. All right, cool. Let's look at 34. According to the Ward and her co-authors in passage 1, expanded educational opportunities will enable women to become more. So talking about here, what if it expands? And it's saying that they're gonna lose their valuable qualities. So it's saying that it'll enable them to become more firm in their conviction that women deserve the right to vote. Doesn't really talk about that. Capable of fulfilling domestic responsibilities, definitely not what it's saying. In fact, it's probably saying the opposite. Knowledgeable about political issues and candidates, no, these are both positive things. Why would an author that's against women's suffrage tell you about a positive about it? So D is the correct answer because it's saying it will be effective in impairing moral values. These moral values that we looked at, like sympathy and disinterestedness. So yeah, the correct answer is D. All right. So now we've already answered all the questions in passage 1. So normally you'd move on to passage 2, but a tip that I heard and a lot of my friends used that were really helpful is being able to eliminate some of the answers in the compare and contrast questions. So how do you do this? Well, if you think about it, any compare and contrast question will have two parts in the SAT. That means what this means is that the answer choice that's correct can't just be right for one of the passages, it has to be right for both of the passages. So if the answer is inaccurate for one of the passages, you can automatically eliminate that answer choice. So let me give you an example so that you know what I'm talking about. 39. Based on passage 1, Ward and her co-authors would most likely object to the course of action advocated by Dilke on passage 4 on the grounds that it would. So we don't know what the argument in passage 2 is, but we do know what the argument in passage 1 is and why they would be opposed to women's suffrage. So let's look for an answer choice that doesn't fit the description that we might be able to ignore. Okay, fail to lessen the animosity between political parties in parliament. This is definitely not the correct answer because nothing about passage 1 talks about the animosity in parliament. It's talking about natural values. So definitely not correct. B, conflict with their aims of local bounds and other social organizations. With the aims of local boards. So the first passage kind of mentions locality, but not really. So B is also probably wrong. We can read C for now. Hinder women's ability to perform their most important function in public life. So far, seems like a good answer. Yeah. And then, but we can't answer yet. We're just going through and eliminating some of the answers before passage 2. And then D, face widespread opposition among representatives serving in parliament. Okay. I actually think this is one of the cases where we get lucky. These 3 answer choices are just so beyond passage 1 that it has to be C. So 39 is definitely C. And I guess we can answer 42. Normally we do the dual first, but in this case, because we could eliminate so many answers, we can just answer the dual. So let's look for something that supports the idea that women will lose their ability to function in society. And 1417, definitely not there. 3031, urge, influence, tell you upon the side of morality. And we believe that it depends on origin and qualities with the natural position and functionness of women. Seems like the correct answer to me because it's talking about these natural societal things that women possess. So the answer for this one is C. All right. And we're going to do this also for question 41. Let's see if we can eliminate some of the answers. Based on passage 2, Dilke would most likely regard the view expressed by Ward and her co-authors in lines 9 to 14, passage 1 as I don't think we can eliminate most of these answers because it's talking about passage 2, but sometimes you can eliminate questions like we did here. All right, let's look at the last comparison contrast question, see if we can eliminate any answers there. Okay, Dilke, passage 2, would respond to the claim of the Ward and her co-authors, passage 1, regarding women's moral influence in politics, most likely by pointing out that in the current era, around politics. Okay, once again, this also asked a lot about passage 2, so we probably can eliminate answers here. So we're just going to go back to the passage, read passage 2, and answer all the questions that are left. So sometimes you'll be able to eliminate a lot of answers, and it kind of makes sense if you look at like the format that they ask you, because they'll ask you like, how does passage 2 refute this one thing that passage 1 says? But if the answer choice says it's refuting this one thing that wasn't even mentioned in passage 1, then it clearly can't be the correct answer. So you can eliminate some of these things like we did here. It never talked about political animosity in parliament in passage 1, so obviously we can eliminate that answer. But now we have one thing left. We just got to read the second passage and we'll answer all the questions that are remaining. Okay. The fact is, we have made up our minds in England that to ensure every class obtaining justice, every class would be directly represented, and that we cannot have too wide an opinion from the people as a whole on the main principles that are to guide our life as a nation. Women may never be intellectually fitted for the position of minister or ambassador, though with their present rate of progress, he'd be a rash man who would attempt to predict exactly how far she will go. But that does not affect one way or other the right to vote. So clearly this article supports women women enfranchisement. Because it's saying, okay, sure, even if women aren't qualified, in quotes, for some jobs, that doesn't change that they deserve to have the right to vote. That's exactly what this first part's saying. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to get rid of that so I can read it. Or the right of a nation to have a recorded opinion on every question with which she is familiar. Why should she sit on a school board and in that capacity make recommendations to the government of the educational code, and yet, when that same code is before parliament, have no power to support its provisions or secure its rejection? Let's go answer 36. Secure its rejection. Let's replace secure. Maintain its rejection. Not really. Obtain its rejection. Yeah, that seems okay so far. Safeguard its rejection. No, it wants it to happen. So, and fasten its rejection just doesn't flow as well. So, here B is the correct answer. All right. So let's keep reading. Why should she sit on the board of guardians and after visiting pauper schools and planning perhaps some new schemes that will turn our most hopeless and wretched population into valuable breadwinners, yet have no influence with parliament to get the scheme carried into effect? So it's saying, why, if women can serve these important, very respectable jobs in certain areas, cannot do very similar jobs in other areas? We cannot afford as a nation to allow such a potent moral influence as that of women to lie fallow. It is very well to call it a reserve force, but a reserve force is never to be put into action, is of small practical value. We think that time has come. We think the time has come when the moral influence must be both organized and put into action. In old times, when population was scattered in manners where patriarchal, individual charity, and personal influence could work wonders. With our vast cities, remember 37 was asking about like cities and industrialization. With our vast cities and ever increasing complication of interests and industries, combination of influence and cooperation in good works has become absolutely necessary unless the feminine element is to be entirely eliminated. Men are going forward so fast that let me get rid of that so we can read that. That the rift between the sexes will become wider if women are to continue working on the old lines and never take a step in advance. Let's go on to 37 real quick. Okay. According to Dilk in passage 2, England has become let me see if I can delete that. Increasingly industrialized, which development has also taken place. The government has become more resistant to the women's suffrage movement. Doesn't really talk about the government there. The methods traditionally used to affect social change have become insufficient. Yeah, that's definitely what it was talking about. It's talking about like how change wasn't happening. So far, yes. The influence of charitable organizations doesn't talk about charity. Political representation among those living in cities doesn't really talk about the cities themselves. It talks about women and the methods that were traditionally used. So yeah, definitely 37 for this one. And let's read the last sentence. Okay, the choice is not between going on and standing still, it is between advancing and retreating. Okay, so this passage clearly supports women's suffrage and will definitely go against passage 1. So let's answer the questions that are left. Okay, in passage 2, Dilk most strongly implies that one consequence of continuing to deny political representation in England is that women will become distrustful of the nation's political institutions. Let's look back. This is the part that talks about what will happen. Doesn't really talk about distrust. Yeah. So definitely not that. Women participation in local organizations will begin to decline. This one seems okay, but once again, keywords are important. Local organizations. Nothing about passage 2 explicitly emphasizes local organizations, so that one cannot be correct. Okay, feelings of animosity between men and women will increase. This one's also a little bit iffy because it's passage doesn't really talk about like women hating men more. It's not really about the emotions. So D should be correct. Women will still have even less political power than they currently do. Yes, this is a little bit vaguer than B, which was on the right track, and it just provides a very quick summary of what the author is saying. So yes, 38 is correct. All right, only 2 questions left. Let's see if we can answer them now. Based on passage 2, Dilk would most likely regard the view expressed by Ward and her co-authors in lines 9 to 14. What do they say in lines 9 to 14? It says here that women have reached the limit where we need to consider the fundamental difference between the two sexes. So how would passage 2, which is against that,